Most anglers have no idea how effective an underspin is. It could be the best way to catch smallmouth year round, and the anglers that know have used it as a primary search and catch bait. In this video, I'm going to show you how to rig it, how to fish it, and exactly why we call it the lake vacuum. So what makes a finesse underspin so deadly for smallmouth is it's super natural looking. It kind of just goes for the water column, looking super unassuming, mimicking little minnows that they feed on all the time. And you can fish this bait pretty much anywhere, whether you're fishing it shallow or deep, depending on the head and the trailer you put on this thing. You can mimic any kind of forage that's swimming through the water column. And most anglers don't have the patience to fish this thing properly. And that's what makes it so effective. They don't see it often, and most anglers aren't fishing it right. So think of a finesse underspin as like a spinnerbait. We all know how effective a spinnerbait is for catching smallmouth. We've been doing it for many years, but this is just a super finesse way to basically mimic what that bait can do. So you can move it over flats, you can push it through subtle vegetation, trigger bites by, knocking it off cover or pulling it through grass. There's so many ways to fish this bait. And this is just a more natural, more finesse-y presentation. Most people don't realize, but you can catch pretty much anything on a finesse underspin. We've learned that we can catch trout, walleye, bass, pretty much anything that swims in the lake. That's why we've nicknamed it the lake vacuum and why it's always tied on anytime we're out on the water. So the biggest pain point for most anglers is they just don't fish these right. These require a certain cadence when you're reeling. They don't have the right gear. They have the wrong hook gauge. They even have the wrong head design for the trailer that they're using. So I'm going to run you through exactly what makes this underspin super powerful, why it's unique, and what trailers we use and why. So for me, there's three types of underspins. There's the small finesse ones, the larger, bulkier ones, and also some smaller ones with a thick gauge hook. All of these have different applications, and I'm going to run you through that. So for the purpose of this video, we're going to run through the finesse underspin. We've got different sizes from 1/8 ounce all the way up to 3/8 ounce in some cases whether we fish. Really, the weight is going to dictate what level in the water column you're going to fish. So for us, the light weights are really for the shallow water, and the heavier weights are for when it's deeper, or if we got conditions that are super windy and we feel like we just need that extra weight to stay in the water column where those fish are. So let me dive into exactly where we would fish the different sizes. So for our super light sizes, even down to 3/32 ounce, that's when we're going to fish super shallow or when the water is really cold. So this thing can easily be retrieved really slow in water that's 1 to 3 feet. Generally, when I'm in that depth of water, I'm going to be fishing the 3/32 ounce, the 1/8 ounce, and sometimes if I want to move the bait a little bit faster, I'll go to the highest end of that range, which would be the 3/16 ounce. Now, when I'm deeper than 3 feet, so say I'm in 4 to 12 feet of water, that's when I'm going to pick up the 3/16 ounce. If conditions allow for it, this is the best size to get the perfect cadence, get the right depth as you're reeling slowly. And we found that that's where we get the most bites is when we're in this size. At times, we will go up to a 5/16 ounce or a 3/8 ounce. I would say the 5/16 ounce is really for your 12 to 20 feet of water on normal conditions, not too windy. If you want to go deeper than that, then I recommend the 3/8 ounce. That's typically the rule of thumb that we go by. Sometimes if it's really windy up shallow, I'll pick up the 5/16, or if it's in the middle of the summer and say those fish are super aggressive, you've figured out that they want a faster retrieve, that's when the 5/16 really shines. Pretty much rule of thumb, the colder the water is, the slower the retrieve you want to go, and the warmer the water is, the faster you want to go. And that's going to fluctuate throughout the year. The little guy, this little micro series in this 1/8 ounce, this is perfect for when it's like pre-spawn or in the fall and those fish are super pressured and you want to go to a smaller profile and also retrieve the bait super slow. Sometimes it's not a matter of will they eat the underspin, it's dialing in the right weight, and color to get those bites. So there's two types of trailers that we use. We like to keep it really simple. Straight tail minnow, like this drop minnow, and then a little swim bait like this drop kick shad. So for the straight tail minnow, we find that this really shines when there's a lot of pressure, when you don't want a lot of exaggerated movement, when the water's really cold. We find it works extremely well. And quite honestly, most people don't even think to throw a straight tail minnow on an underspin. So it gives you that advantage that they haven't seen it before. Now, when we pick up the boot tail, generally that's when the water's a little warmer. And at times, if we want to create a little bit more drag in the water, so that tail will actually slow the retrieve down. So if we find that they want that profile, that size, but they want it even slower than what we can do with the drop minnow with the straight tail, that's when we'll pick up the drop kick shad. Both of them are going to work extremely well for you. They're both extremely durable. You're going to be able to catch a lot of fish with them. But really, keep it simple, straight tail, drop minnow, drop kick shad, and that'll have you covered. One thing that I have found over the years that's extremely important is matching the head. In this case, we got a matte black with the same color in the trailer. We want to really mimic the natural forage. These fish are keyed in on those little minnows, and you're moving the bait pretty slow. So they've got a lot of time to look at it. That's where taking the time to really match the head with the body. You know, in this case, I've got just a plain, this is the OG head with kind of a minnow. This is the matte 309 color. It's a minnow profile head that's kind of silvery with a silvery head. If I'm trying to mimic a perch, you know, I'll use a matte perch color or matte green pumpkin, and I'll match it with, you know, the corresponding color in the trailer. So in this case, green pumpkin. So that's really important, and you know, will help you get more bites. So when it comes to color selection, water clarity is pretty much our primary factor when we're deciding. If we're in a body of water that's super clear, generally we're going to go with something that is more natural. So more often than not, we're going to that straight OG head, which is this, you know, silver color with a very natural minnow profile. So this is like a silver, looks like a shiner, even that matte 309 color or a goby color. If they can really see in the water, I find that it's definitely better to match, you know, what you think they're feeding on. Sometimes you're around perch. And in that case, I would opt to go with, you know, matching the hatch there. Green pumpkin head, matte perch head with a green pumpkin trailer. Now, when it comes to the reaction colors, you know, your chartreuse, your white, if you find that you're having to move the bait faster through the water column to trigger bites, oftentimes those colors will entice more bites. The other biggest thing, again, water clarity, if the water's dirtier, if you have less than, you know, 3 feet of viz, sometimes a white, a chartreuse, even we found over the last couple of years, even fire craw, this red trailer that we're using, no one's using. It appears really good in dark water, in dirty water, and yeah, they seem to love it. So one of the biggest questions I get all the time is, what blade color should you use? Should you use silver or should you use gold? Our rule of thumb is, if there's a lot of light, so you've got bright skies, it's super sunny, midday, I find the silver blade works the best. Other times, when it's cloudy, overcast, early morning, later in the day, we turn to the gold blade. Sometimes, if the water is also a tannic color, so not clear or dirty, we find that the gold blade works the best. I would suggest switching it up as you go. We have found that there are times where they don't follow those rules. And in fact, over the last little while, we've really started to, you know, kind of gain more confidence in the gold blade more than the silver blade. So switch it up. You might find it's different on your body of water, but definitely having both blades in your arsenal is a big advantage when you're trying to really dial in the bite. So earlier in the video, I talked about most anglers don't know how to fish these things right. They don't know how to cast them, reel them in. And most importantly, they don't have the right gear. The most important thing when you're fishing a finesse spinnerbait is being able to get the bait way out there and also feel those bites at long range and even feel the blade working, especially if you're on a body of water that's got grass. You definitely want to feel that if that blade is spinning for you, if it's fouled up. And so what we opt to go with for distance is a 7/8 medium light. In this case, it's the GLF Finesse CX rods. We want that length so that we can really whip that bait way out there. We find that getting the bait further away triggers some of the biggest bites. So really, the further you can cast, the more likely you are to get a bite. The other thing that you want to do is you want to extend your cast for as long as possible. Having that distance allows that fish to find it, track it, and bite before you're back to the boat. Now, what's often overlooked, and most people who use an EVA handled rod or a cork handled rod, when they're fishing these and they're good at it, generally the rod will just load up for them. They won't really feel the bite. If you fish a carbon handle like we have on these rods, it's an advantage because you can actually feel that tick and then time the bite, time your hook set better. I'm not saying that you need a carbon handle to fish these and get the most out of them. I'm just saying it's an advantage if you're super serious and say you're a tournament angler. But most of the time, you'll feel your rod load up, it'll feel funny, set the hook, and you're just going to sweep into those fish. You're not going to have a crazy hook set. Think of it as kind of like a drop shot type of hook set. You don't want to like rip it out of their faces. And now we're going to talk about the gauge of hook and why that matters. Different underspins will have different gauge hooks. These sneaky underspins have a very fine wire hook. The reason for that is you're using light line and you want to be able to get maximum penetration on those fish, especially at distance. When you're using these light rods, if you're using a thick gauge hook, you can try to set the hook. If you're not using the right line, you might either break off or you're not going to get the right penetration. So many times, anglers will find underspins that are out there. And this is where I find most anglers mess up. They complain they lose too many fish. They buy an underspin that was designed, say, for largemouth. Those ones generally come with a thick gauge hook. But for smallmouth, you definitely want that thin gauge hook that can penetrate the thick part of those mouths and also with very little resistance. So when I was talking about the gauge of the hook, the reason why we want to go with that thin wire, again, is because we're using fine line. In this case, we found that using 5-pound braid to a 6-pound leader is the most effective for getting distance and also getting really good feedback from the bait and getting really good cadence and good action, like nice straight action. We typically pair that up with a 2500 size spinning reel with a really good drag. I can't stress enough, do not cheap out on your spinning reel. You definitely want one that's got a really good drag that you can really dial in, because you're not going to horse these fish. You're going to let them play out and they're going to just pull drag. The key is not to pull on them too much because that wire on that hook is thin and you don't want to bend it out. So having a drag that's going to allow you to get away with 5-pound braid to 6-pound fluoro and that fine wire hook is critical. So one of the common mistakes that I see, and I know this might seem so trivial to a lot of you anglers, especially more experienced anglers, is you definitely want your trailer to be rigged on straight. If that thing isn't super straight, your bait isn't going to run super true. It's going to run sideways. It might not, might kick weird. And I found that if you don't have your trailer on there straight, it definitely affects the bite. So pay really good attention. You don't want your bait to be like, up like that. You don't want it to be down, after you've rigged it. The other really cool tip that I recommend is whenever you're rigging your trailer on there, most people think, okay, it's rigged on, it came through perfectly. What I do is I actually pull the plastic and I rip a little bit of the plastic on the back end. And what that does is that when you get a bite, especially with a durable material like the Great Lakes Finesse stuff is, what that does is the plastic will actually pull away and expose more of the hook. It might not seem like a big deal to most people, but it actually will help you get way more fish to the boat. So the most critical part of fishing a finesse underspin is the retrieve. We have found that there's different ways to do it. The first one that's probably the most effective and that we turn to 90% of the time is the straight cast and reel. What you're trying to do is reel the bait slow enough that the blade is spinning, but also keeping the bait just above their heads. So that's where, the weight will really come into play. So whenever when we get on the water, we'll just run the bait beside the boat and get a sense of how slow we need to run it. You'll find that these sneaky underspins with their premium components will spin at a super, super slow rate of retrieve. And that's the most important and the best way. The second way we'll retrieve this is burning it, especially up shallow when we think that it's, they're on a reaction bite. Maybe it's warmer out. When they're, say the point is wind blown and we know that they're up there feeding on bait and they're chasing, they're kind of in that chasing mood, and nothing up shallow is kind of, we know because it's windy, nothing up shallow is just moving super slowly. That's when we're going to burn it. So we're going to upsize our weight. In shallow, we might go to a 5/16 ounce, even a 3/8 ounce, and burn it. The other way you can fish this, especially for like walleye, you know, we've seen this work for bass, but we'll yo-yo the bait too. So we'll cast it out, let it go to the bottom, and then we'll lift it up with our rod tip and let it fall back down. And it's gonna shoot up, spin, go back to the bottom. We found that for walleye, it's an incredibly effective way to fish it. At times, if we still think that the underspin's effective for smallmouth, we'll give that a few tries. And we have found there are days that they want that retrieve. Now, with the advancements of forward-facing sonar, when I talk about that steady retrieve, especially out deep, we can see these fish. A finesse underspin shows up incredibly well on our forward-facing units. So you cast it out there, you want to cast as far past the fish as possible. Ideally, that fish we found is in that 50 to 60 feet away from you distance, that range. Cast it out, 100 feet, 200 feet, and then you pick up your underspin and watch it, and we'll count it down, and we'll watch it go down in the column, and then try to keep it above their heads. As soon as the bait goes below their heads, we find they're not interested. So that is critical. If you do have the technology and you can watch it, reel it slow, but keep it above their heads. Another way that we fish these, especially when we're like practicing for a tournament and we think those fish are hugging the bottom, we can't see those fish on our graphs or on our forward-facing sonar units. So we'll actually use our heavier heads, and we'll just fan cast following the bait. And oftentimes, even if they don't eat it, they're going to show themselves. And that gives us a really good sense of where those fish are positioned. So in terms of conditions of when we go or think straight away we need to be throwing an underspin is in the spring, whether it's calm or windy. I don't know what it is about it, but they love eating an underspin when the water's cold before they've spawned. As we get further into the summer, especially with smallmouth, we do find that the bite starts to slow down a little bit. There's always a finesse underspin bite, but we find that when there's at least a ripple on the water, kind of like a spinner bait, it really shines when there's some, current or wave activity. Any kind of disturbance that can kind of break up the surface, that's when we'll pick up the underspin. And then as we get back into the fall and into the early winter, that's when this bait really shines again, especially with the straight tail, straight tail minnows. That's when we find this really picks up. That water's cold again. They've come off the summer months. Now they got the feed bag on, and they're definitely keyed in on those little young of the year minnows. If you're on a lake in the fall and you're starting to see balls of bait, we can all relate to this, especially as smallmouth anglers. You see those balls of baits, that's when you immediately need to be thinking about picking up a finesse underspin. So if you're fishing around weed lines, oftentimes you got thick weeds that kind of taper off into sparse weed. This thing works incredible, especially when you know those fish are positioned on those weed lines. This will relate to a lot of walleye anglers and smallmouth anglers. Now, when we were designing the sneaky underspin, because we use it so much around that sparse weed, we really wanted a way for this thing to deflect off of those weeds and not get those little pieces of grass every time you rip it through the weeds on the eye, which is very common with other underspins on the market. This is your typical setup head, and then the eye, the line ties further back. These are notorious for getting stuck in the weeds and also getting clumps of weeds stuck here. And as soon as you have weeds on your bait, they're not going to eat it. So when the sneaky underspin was designed, we actually put the line tie right at the front of the head. What that does is this line, it's coming through the water column, the weed hits it, and it just goes right down the wire, and you're able to pull right through, and you get no weeds caught in this little eye. Again, it's the only underspin on the market that has this. The other thing it does is it also doesn't drag the head, so it's going to run really true and straight. Again, we're trying to mimic really natural forage, and that's critical. You don't want an underspin when it's got a head like this to be running head first down and looking super unnatural. So those are a couple little things that make this underspin extremely unique and very effective. So when it comes to hooking these fish and landing them, you know, again, this is an area where anglers either lose a lot of fish or they break off. So the key, again, like I talked about in the setup, was having that super premium drag in a high-end spinning reel, and also a rod that's got a lot of parabolic action. We're talking about, you know, that medium light action, even a light action rod. When you set the hook, you're just going to want to sweep. And then once you hook up, you don't want to like crank on it or do anything unnatural. All you do is hold the rod, just keep reeling, let the drag do the work. Oftentimes we're reeling and the drag is actually still coming out. And we actually want that pretty much the entire retrieve. Like as we're fighting that fish and landing it, there's really no time where the drag isn't, you know, being used. Like you hear it the entire time. So that's how light you want it. And let the reel do the work, let the rod do the work. Take your time. Don't, you know, overforce them, and you're going to land almost every fish you hook. Another important tip and reminder is this is a less is more bait. Again, super subtle, finesse. You don't want to, you know, move. You don't want to shake your rod tip. You don't want to like, you know, make it dart or anything. This is just simply a cast it out, let the blade do the work, let the profile just kind of look like it's unassuming, almost like you're trying to not get a bite. Think about if you're a minnow and you're trying to survive in that vast, you know, ocean of water, and you've got things that want to eat you. Generally, you're not trying to draw much attention. This is the same thing. Think of the minnow trying to swim through the water column, and that blade's going to be what calls them in. And they'll see the flash. They'll look at that minnow just swimming through the water column supernaturally. That's what's going to trigger your bites. So the last, you know, tip would be really don't forget about using these straight tail minnows. The drop minnow has become an absolute tournament staple for us. I'd say 75, maybe 80% of the time we're throwing the drop minnow on there. Again, we're trying to be super subtle, stealthy, and also most people immediately think to pick up a swim bait and throw that on the back of an underspin. You want to go against the grain, show those fish something they haven't seen before. That's what's going to trigger more bites and the biggest bites. So the next time you're out there, remember, we don't call this thing the lake vacuum for no reason. It sucks up everything in the lake, especially when the lake has a lot of pressure on it. Maybe the conditions aren't ideal, or maybe you're just trying to mimic that natural forage that they're already feeding on. Pick up a Finesse Underspin, start casting it around, and you're going to be blown away at how effective this thing is. If this video helped you, hit that like and subscribe. We've got more coming in our Finesse Boot Camp series, breaking down every finesse technique that we use that wins tournaments. So don't miss the next one. Join our community and keep learning with us.